The Kremlin has announced via Russian state media that Ukraine has attempted a drone strike in Moscow with the aim of killing the president, Vladimir Putin. Now, the Kremlin says Putin was not injured in that attempted attack and his work schedule is, I quote, continuing as normal. A video circulating on Russian social media today does appear to show a plume of smoke over the Kremlin. So far, there's been no immediate comment from Ukrainian authorities. Well, covering this story for us is Douglas Herbert, our chief foreign affairs commentator. And just first of all, Doug, just tell us what Russian state media is saying this afternoon.
Yeah, Russia's state media, and it's clear. We have to emphasize that these are the main state-run, state-controlled propaganda news outlets, RIA Novosti among them, the TASS news agency as well. They are citing the presidency. They are citing statements, communications from Putin's presidency. We could show you one of them. It's on the screen right there. It's in Russian. The headline essentially says it, directly pointing the finger at Kiev, saying Kiev has attempted an assassination attempt, if you will, by drones on the Kremlin. This goes in line with basically what the flashes have been out of these news agencies, that two drones, according to these propaganda news outlets, two drones attempted to strike the Kremlin. There was some video circulating on Russian social media sites showing smoke over the Kremlin, sort of out of context. You don't actually know what caused that smoke, where did it come from. The drones that allegedly were used to target the Kremlin were disabled by the Russian by military and special service forces. There was no Putin was not injured. He was outside the Kremlin, according once again to the propaganda outlets. He was in his residence in Novo-Ogaryovo, which is outside of Moscow, a short distance. Russia's saying, the Kremlin saying, the presidency saying, the Kremlin is considering this a terrorist act, that it was an attempt on Putin's life, and that they will retaliate as they see fit. Now, there's the factual part. Let's put that all aside. What does it all mean? What happened here? The context is Russia has reported many drone strikes in recent months. The provenance of those strikes, who launched them, has not always been clear. But in most of those cases, Russia has either presumed or pointed the finger directly at Ukrainian saboteurs, Ukrainian military. Ukraine has not always claimed responsibility for those attacks, but we have seen with growing frequency a number of strikes, a number of attacks, Nadia, in which it's perhaps been convenient for Ukraine to sow confusion or not to right away claim responsibility for these attacks. So, is it possible that there was an attempted drone strike on the Kremlin launched by Kiev in some way? Of course it is possible. Of course it is plausible. It would be taking this to a whole new level, a dimension. Many of these drone strikes have been on infrastructure, on targets, on Russian soil. More recently in Crimea, it was against an oil depot with those big fires and the smoke that we saw over the weekend. This would obviously be on a drastically bigger scale if it were actually the Kremlin being targeted. I will say this, on the other hand, sure, you can't rule out that this is an attempted drone strike. Yes, an attempt by Kiev. On the other hand, you also can't rule out that this is a two-edged sword, because this plays perfectly into the hands of the Kremlin propaganda, of Putin's rhetoric and his narrative, which has been that Russia, not Ukraine, but Russia is under attack by Ukrainian Nazis. The Russian population needs to pull out all stops to protect themselves. Putin can cast himself as the figure that is protecting Russians. This story is perfect to whip up more fear and more paranoia in a country where the propaganda is on full throttle 24 hours a day, already having the entire country on a footing of fear and paranoia. So plausible? Possible? Sure. But the propaganda works perfectly for Putin's narrative purposes right now at this hour.
Douglas Herbert, thank you very much indeed for your analysis on this story that we're watching, obviously, very closely out of Moscow. We'll leave it there for now, Doug. But of course, we'll come back to this as and when we have more information coming out of either Russia or Ukraine.